application restrictions. In this nugget, we'll talk about application restrictions. But we'll start off by talking, first of all, about certain kinds of miscellaneous software issues that are out there. They may not have their own big topic, so I wanted to make sure that I addressed some of those things before we moved on to other topics. So we'll kind of do a cleanup issue right there and make sure that we cover all the bases. And then we'll talk about software restriction policies. This is something that we've had since the days of Windows XP, actually, but it has some weaknesses that will be very well mitigated for the most part by application control policies, which are available for Windows 7 Enterprise and Ultimate editions. Also, this is also known as App Locker, but this is a very effective way of restricting the applications that users can use. Alright, as I get started recording this video, I gotta tell you, I'm about an hour late getting started on this thing. And the reason why is that my daughter just turned 16 and got her driver's license, so I gave her $20 to go down to the gas station, put some gas in the car so that she could kind of drive around a little bit on her own. Well, as it turns out, she went to the gas station, gave the attendant the $20 in gas, and apparently filled it with some gas. And then she called me and said, "What's this red light by the gas gauge?" I said, "Well, that means you're almost out of gas. How can that be? You just put $20 worth of gas in." And then I started to think about things. Oh my gosh, I never actually taught her how to put gas in the car. Where did she put it if it did not go in the gas tank? And I started to get a little bit concerned. Well, I had her just drive home immediately. And we went down to the gas station. What I figured out happened was she never knew that you're supposed to select which gas you want when you go out to the pump and you put the nozzle in the gas tank. You got to select whether you want 87 regular, or premium gas or any of that stuff. So I don't know how long she just stood there waiting for gas to come out, assuming that something had happened, and it didn't. I don't even know how she knew to take the nozzle out of the gas tank. But anyway, that's kind of the way it goes sometimes. And despite that kind of a funny little incident, I got to tell you, she's a wonderful girl that's a real blessing to me and our whole family. Great, great kid, and very proud of her. But I had to go give her a lesson in how to put gas in the tank. So what's one of those miscellaneous things I forgot to tell her about when she got her license? Other miscellaneous things that we might need to know some things about from time to time might relate to various application information that you need to know. Now, a lot of these things on this list don't really have a place in any of the other topics, or they do, but they're kind of minor points. So I'm just going to go ahead and address all of these miscellaneous application data right here, just briefly. And one of the first things you might want to look at, especially if you're having troubleshooting problems, is you might want to prevent certain items from starting up. You can use msconfig to configure that or to prevent that. But let me first of all show you what I'm talking about. If I go to all programs and startup, sometimes applications will add themselves to the startup group. It may be something that's malicious, like malware, adware, spyware, but usually they're more nefarious than that, and they usually hide themselves in the registry somewhere instead. But if it's an application that's otherwise innocuous, many times it'll be some kind of a utility or something, it may put itself in this startup group. And users can also put things in the startup group if they always want them to appear when they log on. Also, applications, or it could be malicious applications or legitimate, either one, can also put themselves in this location in the registry: HKey current user, software, Microsoft Windows, current version, and run. And that would apply only to this user, and there's a corresponding location under HKey local machine, and then the rest of the path will be the same, that also has a run path, and that would apply apply software there that will start up no matter who the user is. It'll always be present there. Well, if you're not really sure you really want those things, you can run msconfig, especially if it's a little bit difficult to track down. I'll just type msconfig right here. Especially if it's a little bit difficult to track down exactly where it's starting up. So what you can do here is you can go to boot, and you can change some boot properties. But really what we're trying to get here is startup. And this will identify things that are in the registry. For example, remember I said in the HKey local machine, software, Microsoft Windows, current version, and run, there's a run path there where anything that's there will launch. And we have VMware tools running there, and that's because this is a virtual machine. You can see it running right there. All right. So that would be one thing. And maybe we suspected that one or more of these things were causing a problem. Well, we could deselect one of them, or deselect all of them, and then start to add them back in one at a time until the problem recurs. And then we would potentially be able to track down what the cause of the problem was. Well, if you want to prevent a startup item, that's one way to do it, is through msconfig. Of course, you could also poke around in the registry or look at the startup group, but I kind of prefer to use msconfig because it consolidates anything that's in startup and the registry both together, and it gives me a single list of items to select or deselect. And then as we abruptly segue to a different topic here, you can also look at ESRB.org ratings. Now, the reason why I bring those up is because I think it's kind of a minor point, but sometimes on Microsoft exams, it seems that we're expected to know what some of these ratings are. So I would just be aware of the almost self-explanatory ratings. If you look at ESRB's website here, where I am right now, they have this ratings guide, and you can identify what each one of these things are. For example, if I don't want my children to hear any foul language, or not very much of it anyway, I might get an E plus 10. That says mild language. Okay, so might be able to deal with that. But if I don't want them to see anything that's extremely explicit, like these things down here under mature, well, I wouldn't want to buy them a game like that. Now, I think for most of us, we're pretty well savvy enough to understand what these are, but for your customers at least, you might need to share this with them, especially if you're installing computers in users' home environments, and you're installing a computer for grandma and grandpa, and sometimes they have their grandkids come over, and that kind of thing. So just be aware of that. And you can also search for various games by ratings, and that's what these are for, is games. Just kind of like you have ratings for movies, PG, PG-13, and so forth. You also have this kind of a thing for games. Okay. All right. So that's a quick look at ESRB. Also, you may need to sometimes identify when software was installed, and the reason why you would want to do that is because maybe this morning my operating system started to wig out. It just started to blue screen me every now and then, or sometimes I would just click on something that seemed to be innocuous and it would just lock up, and I've had to reboot several times. Well, I might need to know if there had been software recently installed that's causing that kind of a problem. One of the ways that you can identify when software was installed would be to go to the application event log. So, for example, if I go back to this computer over here, and I want to go to the application event log, I'll right-click the computer, choose Manage, which we use for a lot of different things that we've talked about in this series. Then we go to the Event Viewer here and Windows Logs. Then we can then go to the Application Event Log. And if I want to scan through this, I can look for, usually it's going to be an MSI something or another. So let me expand this out a little bit. And if I scroll further on down, you'll see there it is, MSI Installer. We can see that I installed Microsoft Office Professional today, in fact, or that's today's date. So we can see when that was installed. Another place that you could go for looking to see about when software was installed is the Reliability Monitor, and I actually quite like this. And the reason that I like the Reliability Monitor as it relates to troubleshooting is it also shows you trending patterns. Remember, I said earlier that maybe you come in the morning and all of a sudden your computer starts to act kind of wacky. It freezes up every now and then and stuff like that. Well, it seemed to be working fine yesterday. Well, you can use the Reliability Monitor to look at trends in how the computer's been performing over time, and you can attach that to certain devices that you may have installed or applications that you may have installed. And the way you locate Reliability Monitor is kind of weird. I thought it would be, under all programs and maybe accessories or tools or something like that. It's not really under here. It's not under System Tools, any of this stuff. The way this is done is it's supposed to be you go to Control Panel, and then you would go to System and Security, and then you would go down here to Action Center, actually up here to Action Center, and in the full path of it, there should be a Reliability Monitor item here. Can't really see it though. I don't seem to see anything there. But if you just go to a Start and just search, then type in Reliability, then it shows here View Reliability History. I click on that, and notice that it takes me right through that same path, but now it shows me this. I don't know why this doesn't show up on any of the links in the previous dialog box there in Control Panel over here. I mean, it should be here, because when you look at this path, there it is. Anyway, enough of that. Here we can identify any potential problems we might have been having. And there's nothing really on this one, but notice that it will show any applications that may have been installed, for example. So if I think I can scroll this down. This is today right here. Scroll this down and we can see, we had a Microsoft Office. It shows some Office was installed or something like that. And if we see that we also had a downward trend here in overall reliability, that might be kind of telling. Actually, let me get another one over here. This is from a different computer. And this one definitely shows a trend. So whatever happened on this day, we had some reliability problems. So, Windows stopped working unexpectedly and some stuff like this. So I might want to see if there was a driver that got installed or an application that got installed that's contributing to my downward trend that we are seeing there. Also, at times, you'll need to add additional software that's actually already included. It's just not enabled. And the way you would do that is you would go to the Control Panel. Then we'll go to Programs here. And then we'll turn Windows features on or off. And very often people will say, hey, what happened to all the games that we used to have in Windows? It seems like even with the Ultimate Edition, there's no games anymore. Well, there actually are. You just got to click on them. See? Now we got all the games. Isn't that fun? So once you click on all of those and click OK, then it will go ahead and allow those games to be revealed on your Start menu, and you can then start getting to work with very productive tasks. And then finally be aware that for people like help desk folks or administrators, especially those that don't have full level of privilege, they might not be domain admins, enterprise admins, something like that, but you do want them to have some level of privilege, maybe they're training or something like that, you can create custom MMC consoles. So what you do with this is you can simply go to, let me close that up, you can simply go to is Start, and by the way, here we can see our games are installed now. Okay, you can go to a Start and then type MMC, and start building your own console for this person. So I can add a snap in here, and then once I've gotten in there, maybe this is someone that I expect to be able to manage the disks on the computer. Okay, so it's for this computer. You can also connect it to a different one. And then I would click OK. And then now, if this person also has privileges for disk management anyway, maybe they're a local administrator, then they can go into this and they can have their ability to manage their disks through this interface. Okay. You can also save this in such a way, if you go to File and Options, so that it saves it not in author mode, but in user mode full access, which does just that. It gives them full access to any of the interface items that are available. You can also choose limited access in multiple or single windows, and then you can kind of just lock down the ability of the user in that point. And that does things like preventing them from browsing through different trees and trees within console and stuff like this. So then I would click OK here, and then when I save this, I can save as, and then just name it whatever I want it to be called. It by default stores that on Administrative Tools. So you can create that only for the administrators that you want to have perhaps specific sets of tools. Now for the remaining topics that we have here, I'm going to be using administrative tools that are normally found in the domain. However, I'm using Windows 7 here, and this is not a domain controller, so how am I going to get access to those administrative tools? What you can do is you can download from Microsoft the Remote Server Administrative Tools, and I've downloaded the 64-bit edition here, but if you have a 32-bit, you can also, of course, do that. And then what you can do is to go ahead and install this thing fully, and then you can add it to your Start menu, and it will have all of the administrative tools that are available normally on a domain controller. That's how administrators that normally run Windows 7 for their everyday desktop are able to fully administer their servers because they have these console tools. So let this go ahead and install itself, and then I'll show you another thing you need to do to enable these things. I'm going to go ahead and allow that update, and then we will see the administrative tools as necessary. And then once that installation is complete, we return here where we were earlier, where you turn Windows features on and off. And down here now we have Remote Server Administration Tools. Where'd it go? It was right here. There it is. A Remote Server Administration Tools, which was not there before. That update that we just installed enabled this for us. One thing I find kind of annoying here, though, is that normally if you click a parent, it'll select all the children for you. Not so here. No, they insist that you go through and manually pick every single thing that you might want to have. You know, all the different tools that you are interested in. I'm mostly interested in group policy and all of these Active Directory items, so I'm going to go ahead and click all these. Notice once again, I have to manually select all of these things, and it's really kind of a pain. But that's okay. We'll just click OK for now. I think I've got most of what I want there. And now you can see what happens is that we now have Active Directory users and computers, you know, all these tools that we might normally not otherwise have on a Windows 7 workstation. If you're working with Vista, there's a similar tool for Vista where you can also add all of this stuff in. Let's take a look here at Active Directory users and computers. We haven't talked about AD very much here in this particular series, but I have a whole series on Windows Server 2008 and 2003 as well where I talk about all of this. You can see here that I've kind of built in a couple of different organizational units. There's the Arizona organizational unit. There's Phoenix admins. There's, for example, the user account for the administrator that I normally use, the trainer account. Here I've got some Phoenix users. Notice that we've got, you know, Phoenix users 0, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And then we have Rutherford Rockefeller. Okay, we're going to see what kind of an interesting character this guy is here in a little while. But we got that going on. And then we also have another thing that we're going to be using quite extensively here, and that would be group policy management in the administrative tools that we see here. Now, a quick primer on group policy. You've seen me in the past go to the Start menu on a local machine and to do a gpedit.msc. Remember, this launches the local policy editor, where I can configure virtually every aspect of what the user can see and do, as well as many security features within this console. All right. Now that's all well and good, but that only applies to this one computer. In corporate environments, I want to configure a set of policies or even one setting that will apply to hundreds or thousands of computers all at once, or at least the next time they refresh their policy settings. So I can do that using this group policy management item. Notice that it's connecting to my forest and my domains, which both happen to be the same thing right now, because I have a single domain forest. And then once we go down into this, you can see here that there's a number of settings that I can make. And the way that I'm going to do that is by using something called a group policy object. Now this is well beyond the scope for Windows 7, but let me give you again a brief primer on this. You can see here that on NuggetLab.com, that's the top level, hierarchically speaking, of my entire organization. Underneath that, I've got the Phoenix OU, and I've got some administrators in here. Let me expand this out. I've got some servers, I've got some laptops, desktops, same with Tucson. So if I apply a policy up here that dictates some kind of an edict down to all of my underlings down here, it'll say remove run from the start menu. That would be one example. Or prevent changing the screensaver. That might be another example of something I could forcibly apply to everybody. And that would even apply to administrators that would otherwise have local administrator access on their own machines. Sometimes that's too broad to apply something to an entire domain. So maybe I'm having problems only with the Tucson users. So I might right-click here and choose Create a GPO in this domain and link it here. Okay, the GPO is created in the domain, but I can link it to a single OU down here, and then whatever restrictions I would set up here for the Tucson users would only apply to those folks down here in Tucson. That would be it. Okay, it wouldn't apply to anybody else here, or even anybody else in Tucson in these other organizational units. So that's how the hierarchy works with group policy objects that we create. And although it's a little bit off topic, you have to understand about group policy objects before you can start to apply them intelligently. And I have I have a 5-day course that I teach with my friend Jeremy Moskowitz on just group policy objects. So there's quite a lot there that, of course, we can't cover in our scope right now. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of the restrictions that I might want to apply. Now, before you do that, one of the key things you have to understand is where certain types of accounts are. So if I go to Active Directory Users and Computers, which, by the way, is kind of confusing at times, because if you look at it, it looks an awful lot like Group Policy Management. Okay, it's almost a mirror image. And that's because Group Policy Management actually refers to these organizational units that exist in Active Directory Users and Computers. Okay, this is where the actual objects are, whether they're user accounts like this, or computer accounts, or user accounts like these, or whether they're computer accounts. That's where the accounts actually exist. Here in Group Policy, we're just looking at the organizational structure so that we can know where we want to link a Group Policy object. Once I link a Group Policy object to a specific location here, it will then apply to that object and any of its children. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at where we have one of our accounts. Here I've got a Phoenix desktop right here, Win7 Enterprise 64. That's the name of my computer account that I'm using and that we're looking at right now. We're going to have somebody else also log on to this account, which will be able to then demonstrate some of our software restrictions. But the software restrictions apply to computer accounts. So the reason why that's of significance is, let's say that this user in Phoenix right here, Rutherford Rockefeller, maybe I wanted to restrict that user. Well, if I right-click here and to create a group policy right there, it won't do anything in relation to that user's applications, which is what I'm after. Why? Because this is a user. I'm trying to go after the computer and how the computer behaves. Okay, so therefore, I'm going to go here to Phoenix desktops, where the computer account actually is. I'm going to right-click and choose Create a GPO in this domain and link it here. And let's say I want to restrict Solitaire. Okay, restrict Sol. Okay, I'll just put Sol for short. Okay, and I'll click OK. Now you see that I've got a group policy object there, which is right now empty, doesn't have any settings in it, but it does exist there. And as evidence that we do have Solitaire on this computer, we'll go to Games, Solitaire, and sure enough, there's our Solitaire. All right. Ooh, I got a good start right there. Hold on just a second. Can't really let this go. Anyway, so you see I've got a pretty good start, and I can play Solitaire. But Oh, and that's another cool thing, and starting with Vista, is you can save or not save your games. Now, in order to restrict solitaire, what would I do? First thing I'm going to do is actually show you the wrong way to do this, or something that's a weakness in what we're about to do. Because we're going to see, first of all, that it won't work the first time I do it. And there's a good reason for showing you it that way. I'm going to go to computer configuration, because remember, again, this is something that you configure on the computer, not on the user. And I'm going to go down here to security settings, and let me make this a little bit more visible. And then we'll go to software restriction policies. Notice that there's nothing configured there right now, but if I right-click and choose new software restriction policies, then I can go down here and choose the enforcement. First of all, the enforcement would be whether I want to restrict DLLs, things like DLLs or all software files, whether I want to restrict all users except administrators, and whether or not I want to pay attention to certificates and certificate rules. Those are all things that can further distinguish who this policy gets applied to. The other thing I would need to know about here would be the security levels, and this is important because you have to pick one of these items. For example, I could choose disallowed and set that as the default. This would mean that no software would be able to run at all except for any software that I explicitly specify is allowed. This is the kind of setting you might set up in a more restricted environment, maybe a classified organization where they don't want to have users run just any software, or they're extremely paranoid about spyware, viruses, things like that that might attempt to eavesdrop secure information, that sort of thing. So if they know that they've got these 5 applications and those are the only applications that people can run, then they might disallow everything, and then they'll make exceptions to allow only those 5 applications to run. Also in this, underneath additional rules, you can see that there's a couple of paths there for software and things to run. There are certain things that will run by default. For example, you can't restrict Windows itself from running, or key operating system components. But various applications, of course, I can restrict. And then this other thing here, the basic user would allow software to run under just any user account. Of course, if the application requires administrative access, they'll still have to have it, even if you specify basic user. Most of the time, for most corporate environments, you're probably going to specify unrestricted, and it's kind of hard to see there, but there's a tiny, tiny little checkbox right there. Gee, I've gotten bifocals in the past couple of years because I'm getting so old, but I can barely see it even with my bifocals. But this identifies this as the default at this time. So right now, all software can run, including solitaire. So what I would want to do here is to go to additional rules and right-click and choose a new rule of various types. And let's go ahead and take a look at what some of those rules are. I'll just identify that. Oh, also, these software restriction policies, one thing that's kind of cool about them is they will apply to all modern Windows. Windows XP you can use this for, Vista, 2000, Windows 7, and all the various server products as well. But the rules here we have are hash rules. What this will do is it'll look at an executable, and it runs a mathematical hash against it in its exact form. And then, anytime someone tries to run that same executable, then it will run the same hash through, and if the mathematical result is the same, then it knows that that's a forbidden application, and it prohibits it from running. There's also certificates. This is not used very often because you have to get a specific certificate in order to be able to set up this restriction or this rule. Okay, so we can use it, but we don't use it very often. There's also path. Maybe I have a certain application that's located under C:\program files /app1. Well, if I restrict that path from running, all an enterprising user has to do is to just move that application to a different location, or run it from a thumb drive. Because it's no longer in the path, that application will then run. So that's a pretty weak rule right there. There's also zone, which applies to things like MSI files that you've downloaded from the internet. And it identifies which zone it came from, whether it's a unrestricted zone, a restricted zone, whether it's from a trusted site, any of those kinds of things. And if it comes from a specific zone of your choosing and you want to allow it, then you can do that. And that would be things, for example, a good example of that would be maybe your intranet site. So if you have applications or utilities that you want people to run from the intranet. And then, again, there's the default rules as well there. And that would be things such as those registry paths that I showed you. And the default is also that normal Windows can run. Okay, so by default, anything that comes into the operating system should be able to run right from the beginning. So anyway, let's get back here and let's go ahead and create maybe a hash rule. This is a very common way to create these rules. That way, even if users move the application to a different folder, trying to throw off something like a path rule, well, it won't work anyway, because now we're checking against the hash of the executable itself. So what I would say is I want that to be disallowed, but I also have to browse for whatever application it is that I'm interested in disallowing. And I've copied to my desktop here sol.exe. So I'll click Open. Notice that as we look at this, then we'll see that it identifies that specific application. It's going to be disallowed as opposed to unrestricted or basic user. I'm going to click OK, and there it is. Okay, so now that is a disallowed application you can see here. Now, then a couple more things about this. Number one, notice that there's no file and save as or anything like that. As soon as you click OK there, this applies to wherever it's linked. And I linked that to the Phoenix desktop. So that should apply to this computer. Now, when does it apply? That's a good question. Group policy objects are refreshed on all computers every 90 to 120 minutes. Okay, so they'll automatically refresh themselves as long as they're connected to this domain computer where the group policies are located. And also, group policies are replicated to all domain controllers in my environment. So eventually, it will get to all of my other domain controllers, for example, if I'm a global organization. And it shouldn't be too long before everybody has this. Also, a computer-based policy, a computer configuration policy, will also manually refresh itself when the computer starts up. And user configuration policies will apply when the user logs on. Okay, so they also apply kind of hard-coded at those times in addition to the refresh interval. But then finally, what I could also do here is I could do a Windows R, or I could do a start, where is it? Start, and then just type GP update, and then you can also do a /force. Now, if I just left off the force, then GP update would look for the version of the group policy objects that it knows about, and it will only update itself if it sees a different version than what it was used to seeing. And with force, I'll force it to apply regardless. I usually use that just out of habit, but certainly don't have to. Ooh, I just lost my desktop connection. Let me reconnect. Well, I don't know what happened there. It just disconnected me for some reason, but I'm back now. This is actually a remote desktop connection. As you can see right here, I just made a remote desktop connection to a remote computer. All right, that's off to the side from where we are here. So there's my policy. Now, normally, I would expect this to work. So when I do a GP update, can I still run Solitaire? Okay, can I still run that game? Actually, yes. What happened here? Well, the thing that's going on with this is that, let's see if I can talk and play at the same time. The thing that's going on with this is that, I guess I can't talk and play at the same time, so I better close it. The actual executable that I used was stale. Yeah, that's right, it was stale. Because, let's take a look at the desktop. You see this sol.exe? I actually copied that from a Windows XP computer to make a point. I'm running Windows 7. Windows 7 has a different version of Solitaire than the Solitaire that came with XP. So if I had created this policy for Solitaire under a previous operating system, and I just kind of let it run, it's been running for a couple of years now, and I kind of forgot about it. Well, then next we upgrade everybody to Windows 7. Now all of a sudden they'll start to be able to run Solitaire again. Why? Because the new version of Solitaire does not match this old version of Solitaire. So what I would need to do here is to, if I want to continue to apply that, it'll continue to enforce against my Windows 7 computers. But now what I need to do is to browse for the actual executable for Solitaire under a current version of Windows. Or, you know what, actually, I'm looking for the wrong thing. I'm looking for certs here. See, if you do a certificate rule, then you'll look for CER or CRT files. I must have clicked the wrong thing. Let me try that again. A new hash rule. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is to browse for the appropriate file. Here I've gone to Microsoft Games. Let me show you the full path here. If I go to the program files, Microsoft Games Solitaire, now I've got the right one. I can click OK. And then once I go ahead and minimize this, again, I would want to run GP update. And then when I log on as one of our users, then we should see that it's going to be indeed restricted from running that particular application. So here, for example, I am logging on as Rutherford, as you can see right here. And Rutherford's going to go to Games and then to Solitaire. Now we're going to see, yep, sure enough, it's blocked by group policy because of the software restriction policy that we had configured. Now this does have some weaknesses. Not the least of which is the fact that, as I showed you earlier on, if the hash changes, then the application that we're trying to restrict will no longer be restricted because it does not match the hash anymore on newer versions of that same file. So what we need to do is to come up with a better solution, and Microsoft indeed has done that for us with AppLocker, also known as Application Control Policies. Now, AppLocker also has some weaknesses. One of those is that it only works on Windows 7 Enterprise and Ultimate Editions, not Professional, not Windows Vista. So that is something of a limitation. But if you're in an organization that uses only Windows 7 Enterprise, which is more likely in corporations, and remember, Enterprise is the same as Ultimate, it's just a matter of the licensing difference, then what you're going to be able to do is to use these things, and these are very effective. Okay. What happens with this as well is that you have to also turn on something called the Application Identity Service. I know it's kind of crammed in there as far as the text goes. I almost forgot to put it in, so I wanted to jam it in there before I forgot. But these particular kinds of policies will not work. You may properly configure them and be very painstakingly careful about setting them up and everything, and then you'll find out they don't work unless the Application Identity Service is running. That's set to run manual by default, so you need to also use Group Policy Object to set that service up to start up automatically. Okay. Now, some things that go on with this. First of all, in the default rules that already exist with it, everyone can run any of the Windows programs or anything in program files, just the stuff that appears there by default. What you would have to do is, if you did not want someone to run something, you would configure either an exception or you would configure a specific application you did not want to run in some similar fashion to what I just showed with Solitaire. Also, there's a fallback rule that will prevent all other apps from running. So if someone tries to run an application that was installed in its own directory, not in program files, for example, then it would prevent that application from running. Also, when you create your application control policies, a lot of this can be done for you automatically. It's actually kind of nifty the way that works. We'll take a look at how that does its own thing. It kind of explores the applications that you want to run and so forth, and it kind of assembles a lot of the information for you. And there's also the exceptions, which I talked about earlier. Maybe I'm blocking everybody from running a particular application. Okay, so everyone is blocked, but I do want to allow some people to use it. Even though they're part of the previous group that was blocked earlier. Well, now what's going to happen? Well, if I set up an allow exception, then that person will be able to run that application. You can also separate this out into user or group. So, for example, again, maybe a specific group of people is allowed to run an application, but there's one user in particular that we don't want running that application. Well, we could set that up so only that user is not allowed to run the application, even if they're a member of the group that's allowed to run it. All right, let's take a look at an example. Now, here we have just logged on as Rutherford, as you can see right here. And Rutherford has decided that he wants to use a application here, Microsoft Publisher, to create a flyer for kind of an invitation for a 4th of July party here, you can see. And you can see it's all very fancy looking and everything, and very aristocratic looking. Look, come to our soiree for an elegant 4th of July celebration. Sorry, who uses that word anyway? I think it's French for an outdoor evening party. Anyway, so we're going to go to this soiree, and champagne will be served, and of course Rutherford Rockefeller will be serving his featured Oysters Rockefeller, and there's going to be a private 4th of July fireworks show. You have to RSVP. It's got a beach house in the Hamptons and a gated community and all this. Oh, and look at this. Please, no children. I couldn't believe that anyone would actually do that, but I actually got invited to a wedding not too long ago where they asked you to leave your children at home. Can you imagine that? And then in the invitation it said if you want to bring your children, then they had a child care service. You'd have to pay them $50 to bring your children to their wedding. Wow. It turns out, though, I did go to the wedding, and it seems that the most distracting part of it was all the adults' cell phones that kept going off. Anyway, formal attire required, and you can see they've got a very posh address and everything like this. So, this is the Rockefellers, and I've decided that, I'm the administrator, so I can look at all the documents on the machine. I see this guy's running this using a work application, Microsoft Publisher, which is licensed for our company, and he's using this to create his own personal flyers here. And I say that's just not quite right. Plus, another reason why I want to shut this down is anybody who uses the word soiree plus gee, anybody who's named Rutherford, well, he probably deserves not to be able to run anything. So I'm going to lock this guy out. And I'm going to show you how I do this here using this application control policy or app locker. And before I do that, let me show you what the IT department came up with for our 4th of July party, okay? First of all, time, just be there, 4th of July and fireworks. We give an address there. It's sponsored by the fun-loving IT department. And it says, ditch the Rockefellers and have real fun. We'll have glowworms and sparklers for the kids. We're going to have giveaways, mouse pads imprinted with a picture of your favorite help desk person. Pick James, okay? Propeller caps, pocket protectors. We're going to give a raffle where we'll give away an official copy of Windows 3.1 on floppy disk. I actually have that in my cabinet. It's from like 1980 something. Anyway, go ahead. Here it gives you the address here and all that. It's our semi-annual 4th of July party. Yeah, any excuse here for a barbecue. So anyway, just show up in your flip-flops and so forth. So my flyer, even though I'm creating this on company time with company software, since I'm sponsoring it by the IT department and since I'm in charge, I get to decide that we're going to use this, but the Rockefeller is not going to be able to use this. All right, so how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to stick with policies here. Now, we had software restriction policies that we just did for Solitaire. This is a different level. This is application control policies. You'll only see this node in Windows Server 2008 R2 or Windows 7. If you're trying to configure this policy from Windows Vista or from Windows Server 2008, not the R2, then you won't see this node. Okay. So, since I'm running Windows 7, we can see it. Now, in order to make this work, what you got to do is a couple of different things. One of those is I have to go into this, and let me expand things out a little bit. And there's App Locker. And then what I need to do is we see executable rules, installer rules, script rules. Installer rules relates to things like MSI files that people try to install. I can prevent people from installing things or running certain kinds of scripts. Most of the time we'll be concerned with executable rules, which is what most of your applications are. Now what I could do is to create a new rule, or I could also automatically generate rules, and this is kind of a self-sustaining item right here. It really does a pretty good job. It allows everything in program files to be run by everyone. Most of the time that's probably going to be okay. Also notice that it's going to create publisher rules. Now remember with the other kinds of restrictions I said that you had to track down a certificate and you had to find the certificate and all. You might have to get that from the software vendor and all of that. What this does is it actually looks inside of any applications that you have running and it extracts certificate data from the signed application. Many applications right now are signed, and so it's much easier to get signed apps. And this will extract a signature from them. It'll use a file hash in this case as well, so the rule is going to be created using a files hash. But there's, again, other things that can be done in addition to that. We'll see that here as we go along. We can also do a path rule, but again, that's a little bit of a weaker method to go by. We could create a hash file rules for all files, and we can also reduce the number of rules created by grouping similar files. Okay. And all this is really saying is when I create additional rules within this, because this is going to be the automatically generated executable rules, this is going to kind of set a baseline for how I do everything else after this point. Well, it's going to use a hash and a certificate. Okay, and so that's how we're going to use this method. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Next here and let it generate its own rules. And you can see here then that it went through the common locations for applications such as Windows and program files, and it found 6 publishers, 60 files, some hashes that it was able to generate, so forth. We can look at the files that it analyzed. There's Windows Media Player. I'm pretty sure that's what actually there it is. Windows Media Player there. We can see that it was signed. Sideshow. The journal. There's a lot of different things here. VMware's got some signed applications in there. There's Solitaire again. So you can see here that we've got a lot of common different things here that have been generated. I'm going to go ahead and create these default rules right now. Now let me give myself a little bit more room here. Let's scroll over a little bit. And you can see here that it's going to allow everything to run that it was able to find. And anybody that tries to run applications in common locations like program files or the Windows folder and these specific items as well, they'll be able to run all of those. See everyone right through here, and it says allow. Also, though, if they try to run applications that are outside of any of these parameters, they will be denied because of a default setting that's in there as well. But look at this. Anybody that's a administrator, well, they will be able to run it anyway. Okay, so administrators are exempt from the restrictions that other people have to comply with. Now what I want to do is to prevent Rutherford Rockefeller from running Microsoft Publisher. So I need to create a new rule, And I had to get rid of my taskbar because you can see it would have covered up the next button here. But I just click on next, and I want to deny him that application. Notice that I don't want everyone here. I would deny it to everyone. Well, I'm part of everyone, and I want to run it. So I'm going to click select and single out this user, Rutherford Rockefeller. Okay, there he is. Then I'll click on next, and I want to put a primary condition of a publisher. I could do again a path or a file hash, but I'd rather do a publisher here because it's going to use certificates, which are very reliable in terms of this kind of restriction. Now, this is a 32-bit application, so since I'm running a 64-bit version of Windows, I'll find that under the x86 directory, and then I'm going to Microsoft Office and Office 12, and I think it's MS Pub, if I remember right. There it is, right there. And then what I could do with this is I could leave it down here at the bottom. Notice there's a little slider item right here. The further to the bottom you make this, the more specific it is, which sounds good, but it can also shoot you in the foot. Remember I told you earlier that if the version of Solitaire changes, then my restriction no longer applies. The same would apply to Microsoft Publisher. I'm running Office 2007 here. If he upgrades to the later version of Microsoft Publisher, it'll increment this file version. And then this rule will no longer apply to him, but the file name will probably always remain the same, more than likely. So I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at MS Pub instead, and then I'll click on Next. And if I had some other sub-application, some sub-component within Publisher here, I could create an exception for that. I'm not going to go ahead and do that in this case, but I could do that if I wanted to. Then I'm going to go ahead and click on Next and just create here. And now we see that we've denied Rutherford Rockefeller from being able to run this application. Now remember what I said earlier, you also have to have a certain service run as well, so we got to go to that as well here. And what was it called? Application identity. And we want to define this to start up automatically and click OK. Now, since this is a setting that applies to the computer configuration, very likely we'll have to restart this computer in order to see that take effect. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this, and when we come back up, I'll log on as Rutherford Rockefeller, and we'll see if he can run this application. So here we've logged back on after restarting the computer as Rutherford Rockefeller. Now we go to the Start menu and notice that the most recently used applications appear here, including Microsoft Office Publisher. One thing I kind of like about Windows 7 is that it also shows you the most recently used files that were open in that application. So this guy tries to open it, but he's not going to be able to because we've restricted that. All right, so there you go. Not able to run the app. But at the same time, I'm going to log back on as a different user, my trainer account, for example, and we'll see that, indeed, other folks can run it. Now then here I've logged back on as the trainer account. I go to my Microsoft Office Publisher where my flyer is from the IT department, and what do you know, but there it goes. Now I haven't actually entered in a product key here, so it's going to prompt me for that here. I'm cheating, so I'm just going to say no here for that. It does allow you to use it a limited number of times. I think it's 25 times before you're forced to use a product key and activate it. But anyway, you see here that it is now able to distinguish between one user and the other, which is a big feature for this product. Now then you'll see here that it's not just because I was an administrator either. I've logged on as just a generic user account, Phoenix User 02. I go to All Programs, Microsoft Office, and Publisher here. And indeed, this user is also able to run it as well. All right, it's about time for me to get out of here. It's Father's Day tomorrow, and my daughter wants to drive me to a restaurant for Father's Day. So with license in hand, we're going to go down the road. Hopefully we have enough gas to get there. In this nugget, we talked about application restrictions. And one of the first things we talked about here were just some miscellaneous software topics that I didn't really have room for elsewhere. But things such as ratings, how to prevent applications from starting up using msconfig, how to identify when applications were installed, and things of this nature. We also took a look at software restriction policies, which, remember, that works ever since Windows XP. It works across all current versions of Windows, and it's fairly effective, but it's certainly not bulletproof, and it does have some failings, one of which is if the hash signature changes for a specific application, it won't really work anymore. But that can be somewhat mitigated by application control policies, also known as App Locker, which are very effective and also allow you to discriminate between various users and groups in terms of who the software will apply to and who the restrictions will apply to. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.